Well, today we'll cover, oh, you know what? It's not really in terms of love and responsibility. I see that now. But we'll cover conjugal love and the language of the body. And probably in a little different way than you've been receiving in the past, too, hopefully. Let's start out with this. I'm going to say this as a definition, although there's no strict definition. This is a very dynamic thing, and it's one that has a lot of peripheral things that surround it. But let's have at least something we can work from. So we're going to say conjugal love is that love, and it's founded on an irrevocable personal consent, where the spouses give themselves to each other without reservation. I know that's a long one, but conjugal love is that love founded on irrevocable personal consent, where the spouses give themselves to each other without reservation. You're all in. You know, this is why this could only happen in marriage. There's no way to achieve this outside of that. You need something that is so binding that it's not just irrevocable by you saying so, but by vow. All right. Somebody sent me a Facebook meme. You guys ever see Addams Family Values? You know what I mean by that? The Addams Family. You know Wednesday, that little dark girl that's in it. It has her laying in bed really stiff, and she goes, "I like sleeping a lot. It's like death without the commitment." You know, a philosopher once said that living together before marriage is no more. Living together is no more preparation for marriage than sleeping is death. I'm sorry, I'm really getting it wrong. That sleeping is preparation for death. So I thought about that. You know, what's missing in both instances is the commitment. All right, even according to that meme. So it's irrevocable personal consent between a spouse without reservation. My mouth is not working. I think I've said this too many times today. So we're going to talk more about this bullet point when we get to love and intimacy, but let's just recognize it now. When you meet somebody, right, it's a discovery of their interior harmony, not just extrinsic qualities. Okay, it's a discovery of their interior harmony, not just their extrinsic qualities. So any one of you or myself, right? You're not just a cardboard flat image of who you are. We couldn't take Owen and put Owen into another body. It wouldn't be Owen. Everything about him, his mannerisms, the way he carries himself, the way his reflections are, we're all like that, right? We're all like that. So, you know, even though maybe emotionally and sensually you might be attracted to somebody, but it's not just, you know, a flat 2D image of that. It's like the whole thing that you're attracted to. There's an interior quality that captures us. That's just the psychology of us meeting, okay? Conjugal love is an extension of that discovery. Now, that is really neat if you think about it. In other words, if you can really grasp that, and I understand that this is somewhat abstract, you're never going to have any dull moments in your marriage. At least they'll be truncated by a lot of great discoveries. Let me say it this way, very practically. There's always moments in my life when I, either with my wife, meeting her, or thinking about her, that there's something new. And it's not like you've learned a new facet of her personality, per se, or you discover something else that she likes. Maybe those contribute. But I'm talking, it's like a person unfolds to you. So I haven't done it with you yet, but I could talk to you. Is anybody here in pure listening? You may not remember. Do you remember me coming in and talking? Oh, did I say this yesterday?
Yeah. And I said, I remember you talking, but I don't remember what
That's
you
pretty
said.
bad. I said it yet. Why did I say yesterday? We weren't even doing notes yesterday. Why did I bring it up?
Someone's questioning me.
Oh, okay. All right.
I don't know, you said from Dr. Listening.
Well, no, I believe you. I don't remember saying it, but I'm sure I did. But here's the difference. When you're never, like, a mystery is never just in front of you. It's like you're involved in it, right? So, you know, you guys have experienced this on some levels in your own relationships. It's almost like the person becomes new for you again. Now, what's nice in marriage is that's refreshing. I mean, if you really can find ways to make, you can't make it happen. It's not something you can manufacture. There's a magical element to it. You can't say, well, let's go out and have a great time. We'll go to a movie together, have a nice candlelit dinner, and then hopefully, something will happen where I discover a new interior depth to you. It's almost these moments that just sort of like, pivot off of sometimes the most simplest thing, and the person unfolds for you. And it's like falling in love again, and it's refreshing. It could be, a glance, the way you look at it. It could be, you're sitting there and you see other people with their grandkids, and it throws you back to when you first met and you brought the kids home from the hospital together. And it's falling in love over and over again. And it's really a beautiful thing. So what I mean by that is there's an interior harmony that's inexhaustible with us. We could even do this with our friendships. Me and you could be friends for the next 30 years. We'll probably always learn stuff. Well, just add to that the level of intimacy that it comes between two people that are devoted and bound together by vows. How much more exciting that can be. So if you could find ways and latch on to these moments throughout your marriage, it's a beautiful thing. So conjugal love can't not be reduced to those things, but it's an extension of that. So it's not like it's friendship plus. That would be a bad way to understand conjugal love, although it includes and builds off of those levels of friendships that we have. So this sums it up. It's a good way to state that conjugal love involves the good of the whole person. So when you're with the other person in your marriage, it's everything about them. It's their joys, it's their wants, it's their aspirations, it's their quirkiness, it's their personality. Like that one song, all your imperfections. I can't remember the whole line. But all of those things then get enveloped. And it's a neat thing, okay? It's a difference between knowing somebody through emails and then meeting them in person. It's probably that drastic of a difference. Or maybe, have you ever read a book and then you saw the movie and you thought they got the character wrong? Like, I didn't think he looked like that, A little bit like that. So what we're going to say then is the question of natural instinct or emotional. Let me back up so it's easier for you to get it in context. Conjugal love is not just a question of natural instinct or emotional drive. It involves an act of the will, all right? So it's not just a question of natural instinct or emotional drive. It involves an act of the will. Let me explain that. I don't mean this to be crass whatsoever, but if you were at a zoo and we saw two animals reproducing, under no circumstances would you say, why are they doing that? I mean, you know why, right? It's instinct. And if there's only instinct, then there's no will involved, and they're not doing it because they have chosen this particular person, at least not for the same level and values that we're talking about, right? And also remember that I told you when I was reading and doing some research on adultery and divorce, what were the experiences of people who one of their spouses committed adultery, it always fell down primarily to, I thought they chose me. So the reason why that's probably so deep-seated in us is that fact that somehow we were no longer chosen was because in the beginning we realized we were chosen. So are there instinctual drives for men and women? Of course there are. Are there emotional attachments that we have? Yes, of course there are. But it goes beyond all that. We actually in the end choose the person. And what happens then in conjugal love is it's constantly a re-choosing. So I really encourage you in your future marriages, make that a point. I choose you again. And actually in the conjugal act, we'll see that's a restatement of our vows. We won't probably do that today, on Monday, but that's a continual choosing. So that's what's nice about us being human. We choose each other. And boy, that should make you feel good. Somebody has chosen you. Now, with the body, even though we think on an intellectual level it's obvious, we often don't think of it in the moment. Only the body can make what's invisible visible, right? I can't tell when Casey's happy unless she's smiling, right? Or I can't tell when somebody's full of joy, or where somebody's sad, or where somebody's tired or fatigued. Our bodies communicate that. Now that's easy enough. We get that, right? But let's not forget the body is incarnate, okay? We're not inside. We're not in there driving this body around. But I have no way to express certain things to my wife except through the body. So if you're at the mall and you see an old couple walking down and they're holding hands, you think that's really cute. You can't replace that by having the guy saying, I feel really connected to you right now. I mean, that's not going to do it, right? I mean, we're very touch-oriented, and the image of two people holding hands, that becomes a sign. So that's what an incarnate body does. And that's very important for our understanding of human sexuality. Okay, so if we say then that not only some of our actions are signs, but the body itself is a sign, it can represent something more than it is. And I'll have to talk about that a second. If the body's a sign, it can represent something more than it is. All right. For instance, the body is not a sign in the same way that a stop sign is a sign. We know what the stop sign communicates, right? Remember we talked a while back about conventional and natural signs. But in this way, it wells up other things. For instance, for those of us that were born and raised in the United States, if we were in Israel or Australia and we saw an ad for some American product, and underneath the ad it said, "Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light." We know those words, and everybody else in the world might know that those words, and where they come from. But for us, they're not just words. If you were overseas and you saw that, nationalism would well up with you. A certain patriotic, a pride, right? I know for me, I already think about, just thinking about it now, I think about my father in World War II. I think about him taking us to the City Hall on Memorial Day and on July 4th to listen to concerts. I think about my friends that fought in Vietnam, or my son-in-law that's in the Army. You can't help but all those things come in with that sign, that image, right? Well, this is with the body. The body is so dynamic, it can communicate so many things on so many various levels, right? So it represents something more than itself. It's not a flat thing. Then conjugal love and the conjugal act, this is the sexual act in itself, can make something else visible. And it does. It makes visible the love of God for man. Conjugal love through the body can make visible the love of God for man. Now, we're going to talk in the next module about the homosexual person. But let's just say now, why does the Catholic Church fight so jealously for that definition? Because it knows that if you change that definition, you're going to change a sign. That'd be like us having an argument over, could we change some stop signs? Can't we just change the stop sign? You can leave it. We're not trying to, take away what other people have as stop signs, but we like something new to be stop signs. You're going to cause confusion. It's no longer going to mean the same thing to all people. And let's be theological about this. Satan did his best to get between between the church and God. Christ representing the church. So when Christ became incarnate, think of the temptations in the desert. Didn't Satan say, come on, turn those rocks into loaves, throw yourself off the precipice, bend the knee to me? He could not get between the church and the Father. So if you watch Mel Gibson's Passion, even though it wasn't biblical, it was still very theologically accurate. Once Christ then willfully, he chose to give himself for the church, it has Satan in the depths of hell screaming in agony because he knew that then it was over. So that's a done deal, right? There's no way for Satan to succeed in that, but he's not out of ammunition yet. So now his plan is, let me destroy the sign. If I can't get between Christ and the Father, Christ representing the church, then I will destroy the sign. If I can destroy the sign, I can at least disorient people. So for the Catholic Church, what the people seems like discrimination is jealously guarding the sign. In other words, this is what it is. We can't change this sign, okay? Because it makes something visible. All right. Any questions on that? One slide, and then Kristen can have his study hall. All right. Now let's talk about the language. What kind of language does the body speak? And of course, we're talking analogically here, right? So there's two things primarily the conjugal act expresses. The first one is spousal. Now, I'm going to use things interchangeably. I am not going to hold you to know that spousal is the effect and unity is the end. But if you hear me use the word spousal, it's a synonym for our intents and purposes with unity. Unity and spousal means the same thing. In other words, this act has the ability to unify two people. And that's very obvious to us. This is why people, when they have deep-seated emotions, even as young people that aren't married, feel the need to express something deeper. That's quite natural to feel the need to express something deeper. It's just not done in the proper context or in the safeguards of a vow, right? There is no commitment like we're in this forever. So that's the one, spousal. The second one is parental. You could also understand this to be procreative. The parental effect is the procreative end, which means there's an openness to life. Now, I want to talk about this a little bit, and if you wind up having some discussion on it, that's fine. But the reason why we're not finishing this segment and module today is because of all the discussions that went on after this. So I thought I need to address it fuller. Openness to life does not mean that you have to have a child every time the couple has conjugal sex. That's not what it means, all right? It just means that that element's always there, and that what you are doing is proper to that, okay? I'm not trying to be sensational or crass, but if you were to go on the internet and look up I don't care if you look up in a biology book or Wikipedia, if you look up what is the purpose of sperm or ejaculation, you're going to get one answer: procreation. That's what it's for. I mean, that's so obvious to us. But then why is it not obvious that the sexual act has that as an end? That does not mean that every act has to result in that. But on some level, what else is it purposed for? Now, we'll see in a minute here, we always used to know this, right? Now, the reason why we got off on a tangent here was then people thought, well, every time you have sex in marriage, does that mean you have to have the full intention to have a child? Absolutely not. Or why would the Catholic Church marry people that are in their 60s and 70s or even 50s who are beyond, childbearing years? They would have to say, well, unless you're able to have a child, I'm sorry, we can't marry you. How old are you? 35? Okay, well, you better get married in the next 5 years. There's never any language like that. So the Church has never taught that every sexual act, or in those cases, any of them, have to result in a child. But they have to be proper to the act, okay? In other words, there are things that you can do that would never result in a child. Now, other classes wanted to know more about that. And that's when I talked about natural family planning to try to explain some of that. And I tried to talk about what it protects. So if you don't have any questions, we'll leave it at that, and I'll address it more on Monday. But I do want to say this now, because they started asking specific questions as to, well, what if the woman had her tubes tied? Or what if a man had a vasectomy? Is that allowed? Well, is it allowed if you do this? Here's the issue. When you get into morality, the biggest issue that I found teaching this to both young and old is that people start out on morality by asking what you can and cannot do. Am I allowed to do this? So the Church says that's bad. That's an improper way to understand morality. And here's an analogy to help you realize why. In the future, you guys are going to go and get a college degree, maybe a grad degree, get training, you're going to start a job. Could you imagine going to your job and trying to be clear on what is or is not allowed? Like, in other words, I don't want to do anything wrong, so you ask your employer, like if I needed some paper, can I bring the paper home? He says, no, you can't take office supplies. Okay, so that's bad? You're saying it's bad? Yeah, so your company doesn't allow that? No, okay. Well, I'm running late one day because I'm stuck in traffic, but I'm supposed to be here by 8:30, and I have to punch in. Can I call? Since it's not really my fault, this traffic, can I call and have a coworker punch in? No, you can't do that. So you're saying that's bad, right? So you're saying that your company says that's bad. I can't do that. I mean, he would think, what is wrong with you? I mean, he says, you're here for the good of the company, right? We're hoping that you're going to contribute and help fulfill our mission, not try to determine what is bad or good. We have to watch when we go to morality and think, especially in sexual morality, because always people think there's a different application of standards when it comes to sexual morality. If you start by asking what is allowed and what is not allowed, oh, so the Church says that's bad, you're missing it. This is about character development. This is about growing in virtue. This is about understanding how do I contribute to the good of my spouse and the good of my marriage. You start by asking those questions. That way you don't have what I would call a juvenile understanding of sin. You know, in other words, with your list, I do this, 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 and this. We've already talked about if you're only trying to, you know, if you're so fearful of going to hell, you do the right thing, that's like the position of a slave. If you want to go to heaven, that's your reward, so therefore you're going to be a good person, quote unquote. Well, that's the position of a mercenary or an employee. It's motivated by love, so it's a different approach. So when we talk about, and this is why I think I should address natural family planning, because the girl wins every single time, right? Once you realize what the cycle is and what her fertile period is, it starts with the communication. The husband and the wife are in communication from the get-go over this. So I'm going to leave it there, unless you had a specific question, but it went into some lengthy discussion, so we never got to this last slide. And that's fine. Okay, so we already went over the module on sexual revolution, and I at least tried to make the case that one or two of the fallout, if you want to call it that, it severed the sexual act from love and procreation. The fallout from the sexual revolution has severed the sexual act from love and procreation. Let me explain that. To use terms like recreational sex is almost silly now, because we would think, well, what's the big deal? Right? I mean, why does love really have to be an element? I mean, the whole term hookup and such, which means it's void of a particular type of love. The movie came out a few years ago. The students were talking about it at the time when I was teaching this, Friends with Benefits. Oh, such a good movie. Oh, that was so sweet. They were so kind to each other. It was sexual relations void of any commitment or love. I mean, in a real sense. I mean, we have to see something peculiarly odd about that. Well, we only know that because of the results of the sexual revolution, which you know did not start in the 60s, right? That was just the fruition of a lot of things that came before it. It also separated from procreation, right? The pill made this widespread. Now, there's never been a golden age, right? So we're not trying to say that people were not on contraception and used other methods prior to that. But since the 60s and the advent of the pill, it has become absolutely widespread. Now, when I was in high school, I was only a couple decades out from the onset of the pill, so I really didn't know any girls that were on it, maybe a couple. Now, it doesn't mean that they told me either, but it wasn't as widespread. And the reason why I think that was true is because when people were dating and anybody was sexually active, there was a lot of concern about getting somebody pregnant, all right? That's not really a big concern today. As a matter of fact, they probably will think you're negligent if you're not on some sort of protection or contraception. In my marriage, my wife was not on it. She'd go to the OBGYN and he'd look at her like she had a third head. He said, "What contraception are you taking?" She goes, "I'm not on contraception." She says, "You don't use anything at home?" She goes, "No." "So you're okay with getting pregnant?" I'm like, that's the alternative, you know? Like there's no other alternative. It's either I'm on contraception or I get pregnant. But my point is this for now, is that the only reason why we have that image in our mind is because we've totally separated the two. And contraception has allowed that. So we can at least admit that it has to have some effect, right? And on Monday, I'll show you how it leaves the woman ready whenever the man's ready, rather than it starting with communication, okay? But more of that later. So let's be honest with ourselves, right? Humility is really like a transparency of ourselves. Since there's never been a perfect time, and nobody here is perfect, and I'm not perfect, outside of Christ and Mary via the grace of the Immaculate Conception, she would not be perfect. When it comes to these issues, says Dietrich von Hildebrand, we are poor lovers. We're just poor lovers. We're not good at doing what we'd like to do. And this is in actually an introduction to her husband's book on love and sexuality. She says we have weak wills. Our will is weak. Okay? As far as commitments, remember the seminarian, Zach Ware? He's 24, so he considers himself in your generation. He says our generation has a very difficult time making commitments. Why? Because every time you make a commitment, you say no to something else. And we don't want to say no to anything, so let's avoid commitments. that plays into our relationships. As far as duty, I mean, really, there's something that's required of us that just seems like it's imposed on us. And responsibility, the thing is with responsibility is, it seems like it's an impinging on our own freedom. Right? So we can often talk the talk, but we can't be relied on. Think to yourselves, it's non-sexual, but think how many times your parents have asked you to do the dishes. If they ask you, how long does it take for you to get to the sink? If it's my kids, I'll get it later, you know, that type of thing. So we're weak-willed. That's the reality. And humility will help us realize that, all right? Last thing about this point is, as men and women, we are so eager to win a fight over others, right? I can be faster than them, I can be better than them, I can be smarter than them, I can get a bigger house than them, I can get a better education than them. Go down the line. There's a lot of competition. We're so eager to win a fight over others, but we show little desire to conquer ourselves. We show little desire to conquer ourselves. You might think in sports that it's good for you to hold the person to a high standard and push them so they're faster and stronger. That's a good thing. We're not saying it's not a good thing. That's okay. This one? Well, it's just that we kind of fall short in all those things. So weak will, lack commitment, all those things. So we're eager to win a fight over others, but okay, when was the last time you really held somebody to a high standard morally? You know, I mean, we have so many fitness centers in the greater Reading area. How many places do you know that people meet trying to grow in virtue of temperance, and justice, help their marriage better? We kind of like almost laugh at that in a sense, right? It seems like that's silly. Well, that's what you do by yourself. Well, but why aren't we encouraging more? I mean, again, could this be what C.S. Lewis has said, that we mock the very thing we expect in other people? We want people to be better at commitment, but when they're really strong in commitments, we kind of make fun of them. You know, we want people with a strong will, but we make fun of them as, you're not, you're no fun. I mean, do we do this sometimes? So we have to be careful that